All right, I will call the meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on the agenda is approval or revision of the agenda for this evening. We do have on item 3.01 approval of reopening school protocols, but it's my understanding we're not going to be approving the protocol this evening to give a little bit more time to the district office to get more information in. We'll be doing that at our special meeting on the 2nd. So item 3.01 would be removed. Any other discussion of the agenda? Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? I should have did that first. Thank you, Daryl. Second from Kelly. Any discussion of the agenda?
So, yeah, just if that's the case, then at the September 2nd special meeting, will there be a public comment section of that agenda? Because there's not tonight.
Yes, as I mentioned to the board, there will be a public comment section on the September 2nd meeting to allow members of the public to comment on the opening guidance. I think by then we'll be able to have something in writing, which I think will be important for people to be able to see everything all together, all of the guidance, that are not just hearing hearsay or just things they remember from a board meeting. So we'll have that for members of the community and staff beforehand as well.
Okay.
So to be,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't see you. You go ahead.
Oh.
Go.
So I'm wondering if perhaps we could frame it more in line of public questions, because I think there are perhaps more questions. I understand commenting, but sometimes commenting doesn't necessarily some of our actions. So if they have this final opportunity to ask any questions, even though we've been very forthright in how we're going about these steps, but I think that would open it up even further.
What we could do is we publicize that meeting is to let people know exactly what you just said, that we will be voting, and we should start publicizing it right after this meeting and letting them know the time for any questions. And if they're I think it would be helpful if people sent their questions in, not that they have to, but since it would be the last time, if there may be background information that we need to look into. So I think we should encourage people to send their questions in as well, just to make sure that we have all the information that they're looking for. Rebecca, did you have your hand up?
Yep. So I'm just curious, if we do reach consensus on some elements of reopening tonight in terms of policies, we won't be voting on any of those things?
Well, if the board wants to vote on specific elements, we certainly can make a motion and do that.
I understand the need to flesh out the details. I just think if there's certain policies that we have reached consensus on, it would be better to let the public know sooner than wait another 2 weeks. Because that's my opinion.
Why don't we wait until after the presentation, and then we can amend the agenda as we see fit to approve any individual or specific items. That sound good to everyone? Any additional, Elena?
Yeah, Marissa, yeah, and that's assuming, Rebecca, that the administration actually has a recommendation to put forward, because I wouldn't, regardless of what we may think right now, we need to make sure that we understand what the administration is recommending prior to us even taking a vote on reopening plans. But I just still strongly feel that since there is going to be a presentation, that if there is anybody in the audience that would like to comment, or if they have questions specific to the presentation, I would feel better if we would allow them to speak.
Well, let's see, we've got 4 members of the public present. Did anyone who came this evening wish to have questions or think you might have questions that you want to raise? If you can just raise your hand. I'm sorry, I can't see. Okay, there's one person, one person? Okay, we won't do it right now. I was just checking to see. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
I'm sorry, can we turn that fan off? I have trouble hearing as it is, and I'm having trouble hearing a lot of what's being said.
Well, I would like to make a motion then to add whether the board, it's at your discretion if you want to call it public questions, public comments to the agenda to follow 2.01, and if we could put it at 2.02 or make it 3.01, whatever you like, Marissa. That would be my motion.
Is that okay with the rest of the board?
I'd second that.
Okay, so we haven't voted yet, but I just wanted to get like the feeling of the board. We'll add that as item 2.02. So with that, those two changes to the agenda, is there a motion to, we already did a motion to approve. All in favor of approving the agenda?
I had a comment.
Oh,
but-
sorry. Go ahead.
Can we make any comment, like beforehand, indicate that these are questions about reopening and comments about reopening as opposed to a general comment session when it comes to today?
I think that's a good idea, so that they're specific to reopening, to mask wearing, and to anything in that regards, COVID related. Okay, that sounds fair.
I mean, there's only two people here, so I'm not sure what it fundamentally matters, what it pertains to.
Agreed. I'm thinking for the next meeting where we will have a public comment. So I didn't make myself clear. I'm sorry. For the next meeting where we will have public comment, either two sessions, one public comment session where it has to be about reopening and questions about that, and another that's any topic, or just limit it to the reopening topic.
This motion on the table, so I think we should
Okay.
take care of that and then address your question for the next meeting.
Okay.
All those in favor, please raise your hand and state aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? Okay. Moving on to item 2.01, the superintendent's report on reopening, including the results from the medical advisory committee meeting. Dr. Tice?
Thank you, President Mims. In your board docs, you will see a series of documents that we have been working off of, including back to school information from the New York State Education Department, as well as from the Onondaga County Health Department, and from Upstate Medical University, a group of physicians that have been monitoring the pandemic and have released different informational correspondences, emails over time. I did share all these documents along with the comparison sheet with the Medical Advisory Committee yesterday, and I know we have some representatives here tonight, Dr. David Hansen. I had the opportunity to meet with our Medical Advisory Committee yesterday to discuss the COVID pandemic and the reopening of schools. The committee was instrumental last year in helping us to develop our initial plan, which you may recall had to be submitted to the governor by July 30th, 2020. We had 14 healthcare providers in attendance last evening, and their specialties range from pediatrics to anesthesiology, pediatric endocrinologists, emergency medicine, and hospitalists and internists. They were adamant about requiring masking indoors in order to have all of the children return to school for 5 days a week. They asked the school district officials to provide information to families on where to get the COVID tests in order to help parents navigate the myriad of quarantine requirements and to keep the children in school as much as possible. So they understood that social distancing was going to be reduced to 3 feet, and they certainly knew that providing information to families, as we did in the past, would be important in carrying forward. They also talked about being vigilant in testing of students who may be exhibiting symptoms in the event that their families decide to send the children to school instead of keeping them at home. We will not be doing the temperature checks. They were very ineffective last year, and none of the guidance indicates that that should continue. But there certainly was a concern among the members of the committee that there may be some parents who families who elect to send the children to school in the event that they're symptomatic. So they asked us to be vigilant in paying attention to that, as well as mask wearing. In fact, some of the physicians have noticed a few of their patients have exhibited co-infections between COVID and another virus or infection. The healthcare providers praised the school district for our efforts to conduct the surveillance testing last year, and they highly recommended it to be continued going forward. I did share with them that it probably at this point will be pool testing going forward, and there were concerns that for 12 to 24, perhaps even as much as 48 hours in turning that around, as well as reflex testing, where if a particular pool tests positive, that then they would have to do the individual tests in order to find out who was exhibiting the symptoms. So it was a very good conversation. I don't know if Dr. Hansen or, again, I can't see all in the back.
I believe that's Mr. and Mrs. Durant.
Okay, if they would like to come to the podium and share some of your thoughts from the committee meeting. It's not required, it's just I'm opening it at this point. That's all right. The next item I have, executive order, the county executive. Earlier today, the county executive, Ryan McMahon, issued an executive order requiring all school employees to be vaccinated or to provide evidence of weekly COVID testing. So as you might expect, we're unpacking this right now. We'll be meeting with legal counsel in the days ahead, as well as union stewardship. Assistant Superintendent for Personnel, Mr. Jeff Gordon, is working on an employee survey with our IT department in an effort to ascertain employee vaccine status. So we've also been working with legal counsel on that in terms of what we can ask and cannot ask. In terms of COVID planning and school reopening, as President Mims indicated, we will be putting forth a written plan at the September 2nd meeting. You technically do not have to approve it, much like last July 30th, but we will do so in terms of the federal stimulus money, which plan is required to be approved by the Board of Education. But I think that will take everything that's coming forward. Certainly the recent executive order from the county, rumors out of Albany indicate that the new governor, Lieutenant Governor Hochul, when she takes over, will be making changes as well. And so we may get more information from the New York State Department of Health that has not been forthcoming. But as it stands now, and we can never over communicate in terms of getting this message out, as we have since the beginning of, or since the reorganization meeting in July, as mentioned at that reorg meeting, we are planning for the full reopening of school in September, as there will no longer be a virtual or remote option for students and families as there was last year. This is because State Ed is directing that they want all of the children back in school. With all of the students scheduled to be back in school, we will be unable to offer an online courses unless we hire additional faculty. As you know, for example, less than 100 students last year, we had to hire 5 full-time elementary teachers just for the fourth quarter. So to be able to do that now would certainly require a large component, and we may not even be able to find the teachers, in particular at the secondary level. At this point in time, given the fact that quarantines will be a reality, I'm recommending that we begin the year much as we concluded, with masks being required inside of the school building and masks being optional outside of the school buildings. Furthermore, I'm recommending that we revisit this guidance every month going forward in an effort to ensure that we're congruent with any local regulations or compliance with state mandates. And we've seen other organizations such as Syracuse University reference that too. Families need to know that students in quarantine will be provided with lesson materials either in print form or via Schoology, similar to when they were sick for an extended period of time prior to the pandemic. Families need to understand that flexibility will be limited. All of the children are expected to be back in school as it was prior to the pandemic. There will not be an ability to move between in-person, hybrid, and remote learning models as there was last year. While some of our families appreciated the flexibility, others, as you know, desired having the students return to more in-person instruction. Many families were worried about the mental health of the children due to the isolation from their peers and the amount of screen time that permeated the different learning models. This year will be different than last year. Students will be back in school, And unfortunately, flexibility will be a casualty as a result. Finally, it will be important for our families to remember that if a medically fragile child needs a remote option, that the remote learning model will be provided by the OCM BOCES. Even though this past year was less than ideal for everyone involved, the school district was able to provide all of our electives in the hybrid, in-person, and remote learning models. I suspect that will not be the case this autumn when OCM BOCES will be in charge of the virtual platform for all 23 of their component school districts. While some have been critical of this decision, I am grateful for the collaborative effort between the school districts. Many of them will be sending some of the medically fragile faculty who have identified themselves to work at the virtual school with BOCES. So they will be certified instructors. The important thing to remember with the OCM BOCES model is that families will have to commit to a one-year commitment. This is because we're purchasing a seated OCM BOCES, and there will be no ability for families to switch back and forth as there was last year between remote and in person. Other families I know are considering homeschooling their children and have been in contact with our Office of the Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, Dr. Mary Coughlin. And then last but not least, I know you, speaking of Dr. Coughlin, you received an email from her and Ms. Jonna Johnson today in terms of planning for opening day ceremonies and our welcoming remarks. As you can see, because of the social distancing, we will be in different locations throughout the district. And I would recommend today that we decide how we are going to divide up. Certainly President Mims and I will be here where the live streaming will take place. But I think the rest of the governance team should divide up between the different venues as we bring everybody back indoors with masks. That ends my report.
Thank you, Dr. Tice. And we, on behalf of the board, I want to extend our appreciation to the members of the Medical Advisory Committee who took their time to meet with you and give you their recommendations as far as how we should move forward. So you're going to prepare written guidance with metrics and et cetera for the district. Are you going to be meeting with the labor relations team to go over your report, specifically how, I know you said Jeff is working on this, but I think, I wonder if you're going to have that meeting because everyone's going to be impacted by either having to show that they were vaccinated or have testing. I'm also curious as to if someone doesn't want to do either one of those options, what would happen? That's probably a question that the lawyers are going to have to sort out.
That's exactly the questions that the lawyers will help give guidance on. I know the different districts we met today divided up between which law firms they're currently working with. That certainly is going to weigh heavily. Yes, it's my intent to meet with the union stewardship through the labor management team as we find out more information. I know some unions are embracing this. Others, I think, are a little more cautious, and it'll be interesting to see. I know in the past it said that, does the county executive have that authority? It's my understanding he does, and I think it just has to be vetted through the law to see, again, what we can ask and what we cannot ask.
And one more question before I let someone else have a chance. So parents who have a child who is medically vulnerable and they want to do the remote option. So we have a limited number of seats, correct? How are we letting those parents know how to apply, I guess, or request those seats? And then what happens if we have more seats than we've purchased?
Good question. We fielded a few inquiries so far. They've been coming into Amy Evans, our new assistant superintendent for special services. She has been in contact with the families. They are debating whether homeschooled or the BOCES option fits their needs. We have pre-purchased 25 slots at BOCES K through 12 to try to accommodate the students who we believe Again, we had to predict who may be medically fragile and in need of that. So I know that the building principals are reaching out, or parents are contacting us directly, and we are certainly trying to process that as best we can,
Is
and
there
to
a,
let the families know what different options
is
they
there a
have.
deadline that parents need to be aware of?
Yeah, I know some schools have set a deadline and some are wrestling with what to do. And so we have not imposed a particular deadline at this point to try to give families as much time to make an informed decision as they need.
Okay. Additional questions from the board? Dan?
Yeah, I have a few, but I guess let's start with that, with the BOCES seats. I understand with the reservation and payment of seats, the rationale for not being able to go back and forth, like last year would have been going in and out of cohort C. But if somebody does, say, a half a year in the BOCES program, and circumstances have materially changed within our district and within the community, why would they not be able to switch back into the district, which wouldn't involve any additional cost that I'm aware of?
I think it would have a lot to do with the courses that are being offered there. It will not be our full slate of electives. So the course that the child may sign up for, I'm just pulling this out of the air, might be English 9. Does that correlate to a course back here? You know, it's not going to be an honors physics or whatever. It may just be physics. So the courses at BOCES will be more generic, as some school districts offered in the area last year. So they may not have all the information they need to slide and be successful back into a class here.
But if it's at an age group that can be transferred, whatever classes they're taking, that there's comparable here, and I mean, elementary is the easiest of the examples in there. If course-wise, it is a logical enough transfer, would there still be a barrier for somebody to come back in, say, at mid-year? And if so, why?
Again, I think it depends on, every situation's unique. I don't want to say yes, I don't want to say no, but I am worried about the child coming back and being successful. I mean, it's incumbent upon us to be able to work with the children and the families to try to ensure success. And without knowing what the BOCES program is going to look like, is there articulation and congruency? I would hope, but I haven't seen what the curriculum is at this point.
So I mean, I guess that's my point is if you don't know today what the BOCES program is going to look like, then our families don't know what the BOCES program is going to look like, and they're being asked to make a full year commitment to something that none of us know what it looks like. So I would just be hopeful that, again, I understand not coming back and then going to BOCES. I understand that, but I would be hopeful that the district would be willing to work with a family and a student if they opt to begin the year in this unknown BOCES program and decide at some point during the course of the year with changed circumstances or based on the program that they'd like to come back into our student population. I would be hopeful that we would be willing to work with them in that circumstance and not have it be a hard mandate that you signed up for this, therefore we don't want to hear from you, you're not welcome back. So is there room for that?
Is there room for it? I will check into it. I mean, BOCES financing aside, I also know it's for medically fragile students. This isn't kicking the tires on something. That this is really for those families, for whatever reason, a physician's note, another health provider's note, needs that separate remote virtual school out of fear for health concerns. So will the pandemic subside mid-year, as you're alluding to? I have no idea. But if they're going to sign up for that remote option, it's probably because it's a medically fragile student that needs to be isolated. I really don't think it's a preference thing at this point, other than they want their child isolated from the rest of the population.
Okay.
So never say never. I get where you're coming from, but at the same time, I want to be sensitive that this isn't, well, gee, do I want chocolate or vanilla ice cream today? It's about medically fragile students. That's why we picked the 25. We didn't put in a higher number, because we did have obviously more students in cohort C last year, as you know. I mean, we ended the year just at the elementary level with 83 students in the K-4 model. So 25 is geared, again, not preference other than medically fragile students.
Okay.
Does that help?
It
Again, never
does.
say never, but.
And I know you won't have final
Right.
answers tonight, and I don't expect final answers tonight. It's evolving. I get it. I just want to make sure that as we try to stay student-focused as much as we can, that if there are circumstances that would warrant somebody coming back into our student population, that there is a path for that to be reasonably reviewed.
I think we can say yes, but I think with medically fragile students that they will want to commit and know that they have that seat for the entire year. Again, this isn't preference that my child really enjoyed remote. The idea is everybody is back in-person instruction, and that this medically fragile option, or for those that are fearful for whatever pre-existing medical condition, that the child should not be back with the rest of their peers.
Okay. My second question piggybacks on that, and I understand all the reasons why we're not doing a cohort C this year, and the incredible burden that put on our teaching staff, and I understand all the reasons for that. My concern, though, is even without that, is for all of the students who are in the building 5 days a week. And as I understand the masking recommendation, that it's primarily premised on the reality of quarantines that would happen in the classroom. And we can have great disagreement in this community about what worked and didn't work last year. But I think that we should be able to universally agree that the single most detrimental thing, through no fault of this district, it was mandated by the state, but that the single most detrimental thing was the isolation that so many of our students had to deal with at home in remote environments, and not being with their peer groups, not being involved in extracurricular sports and whatnot on a remote basis. Quarantine is that isolation magnified. And I would like if we could find a way to mitigate the isolation effects, especially the academic results and effects of quarantines. So my question coming from that is, we know all of our classrooms have the technology to be able to live stream a class. All of our teachers are greatly experienced in live streaming a class. So if a class has one or more students in quarantine, can we not turn on the live stream for that class so that that student who is home for 10 to 14 days has a way to still hear what's happening in their class, learn what's being taught if they choose to log into that, instead of being stuck home 10 to 14 days working on materials only, especially because we know there's students who might end up potentially, they could be quarantined 2, 3, or more times in the course of a year. That has a really significant mental wellness impact and a very significant academic impact. So can we not turn those streams on if there's a student in a classroom who's out in quarantine?
I think those conversations are happening right now, and I don't want to get too far out ahead of that. The concern is if it's one or two, our intent is to provide information via Schoology or print materials, much like prior to the pandemic if a child was out ill for an extended illness. I think what you're talking about, I mean, I know you're hoping for one or two. I just don't know if it's feasible in terms of managing the entire class. The question, as we saw in the New York State Ed guidance, is if an entire class is out on quarantine or an entire building is shuttered because it's on quarantine for whatever, a microcluster, then it's incumbent upon the school to provide that remote platform. So those conversations are happening right now. So I think it's going to be an economies of scale. One or two, maybe, maybe not. But definitely as we go to a class or an entire school, I think we have to have mechanisms in place to be able to provide that.
All right, well, I look forward to hearing what's more on that, because that is, even if it's just one or two, it's when somebody's out sick pre-pandemic, they're sick. They're generally not doing academic work in most instances. When somebody's out on a quarantine who's healthy and asymptomatic and is just sitting at home, I think we've all seen the detriment that can have academically and emotionally on those students. And I think, there's certainly things that are required. I think we should be going that nth degree beyond what's required to try to best accommodate those students who are home essentially against their will in those circumstances. So I'm glad to hear that those conversations are taking place, and certainly before the September 2nd meeting, would look forward to hearing more on that. So thank you.
Can we drill down a little bit into the quarantine, the contact tracing that we know? Because, looking at the comparison chart that you provided, quarantine, I think, is going to look a lot different than last year. So I think it would be helpful for the public to know what we know, what you know right now. And clearly we know that there's a very big difference between universal masking and not universal masking. So would you mind summarizing that, Craig?
Certainly, and that's something we can share with our families. We've asked for updated quarantine and contact tracing guidance. And I think with masks on, and again, this could all change when the New York State Department of Health issues something under new Governor Hochul. But that's one of the reasons that I am recommending, to Ms. Romano's point, the administrative recommendation is masks inside in terms of limiting the collateral damage. That also includes masks on the bus. Even though we can put multiple students in a seat on the bus, and they recommend, as you read, seating charts, so we can, again, contact trace and know where the students were. I think if we can limit the number of students on quarantine, that keeps everybody in person in school. One of the things that Mr. Seidberg and I didn't talk about in that exchange is we hope everybody's healthy with the quarantine and not out ill. And certainly teachers, as you know, the adults last year is when we came close to the guardrail, as I know all of you know. It wasn't so much the students, it was finding the adults to cover the classrooms and the substitutes, which gave us pause for concern. If a teacher was just in quarantine and healthy, they were able to continue working. But there were times when a teacher wasn't able to provide that. So to your point, I think, we can get the guidance out. We can try to educate in terms of the contact tracing. As you know, we were deputized, the Onondaga County Health Department, with the New York State Department of Health liaisons out of Albany, worked with us in terms of grading our assignments. And even when we think we know what's going on, as I shared with you this summer, one county overruled another county, which made no sense to me. I know I'm not a medical expert, but I think, to your point, as much as we can do to educate the families and inform them that we are trying to keep the students in. We're not trying to put them in quarantine unless the guidance says so.
Right. And just to sort of put in context what Dan's talking about, it looks like NYSED guidance, Onondaga County DOH guidance, and CDC guidance does not require quarantine for masked and appropriately distanced students. So I think it's just important there are recommendations for COVID testing, but that is different than what it used to be. And so that should mean there's less quarantining if we follow universal masking requirements.
One would think, and same for students, the older students who are vaccinated. That makes a big difference, as you know, whether they're symptomatic or asymptomatic. That's a good point. We can try to push that information out as it crystallizes.
Thank you.
But I know there's still, I mean, I know I can think of 6 individuals with breakthrough. With the vaccine, they have gotten ill. And we need to be prepared. I believe we should be prepared with a plan if that is happening for whatever reason, that we can jump into action for those students and staff members as well. Because I understand we're masking, and there might be an occasion when 100% of the time those masks aren't on, and it may be enough for somebody to contract an illness, and there you go. And those individuals that I know that have gotten it were very careful, according to them, and yet they still came down with the Delta strain.
And as you saw in Commissioner Dr. Rose's guidance, and I applaud her efforts. I think you all know that nature abhors a vacuum, and she was great in terms of stepping in. She's made it abundantly clear that, again, we want the students back in person. We're doing the best we can. Can we do something for 1 or 2? Maybe, maybe not. But as classrooms go on quarantine or buildings get shuttered, you're right. Her guidance indicates we have to be able to pivot to keep things moving forward.
Dr. Tice, to that point, so if the worst happens and we do have to, schools do shut down, do we still have all the systems in place so that we can get, computers to kids so that we could switch over? Sarah, I'm sure it wouldn't be seamless, but, that we would be able to do that pretty quickly.
Well, I give the teachers and the administrators and our IT department a lot of credit. We moved very quickly back in March of 2020 to get the computers out there. And I think people are experienced with them now. We do have the one-to-one devices. I think we would be able to move quickly if needed.
Additional questions from the board? Someone who hasn't asked anything yet? Sherry?
I think I see the answer to this in the comparison you provided, but the teachers this past year were doing wiping down of desks in between classes and multiple wipe downs each day, and students had to be out of the classroom while that was occurring. In the chart you provided, it says additional cleaning protocols are not required. Is that referring to teachers not cleaning the classrooms? How is that?
Correct. It doesn't mean we stop doing the things we were doing with custodial, cleaning high-touch areas, disinfecting water fountains. We will still clean the plexiglass barriers in the cafeteria. Lunch will return to the cafeterias, but at the same time, having to wipe down the desks in between classes, no. As you've seen from the media and the medical research, it isn't a contact surface thing, it's more the aerosol. So again, I don't want people to think we're going to stop doing everything we're doing. We're still going to use the air filtration systems. Obviously, we've upgraded the MERV filters and the unit ventilators, but that obsession with cleaning in between that's been taken off the plate for now.
I guess then, as a follow-up, I know my children, every time they walked into a room, they had the sanitizer squirt as they were, the station as they walked in. Are we going to continue that?
The guidance now says that they do not have to, for shared materials. We had to have separate baggies before. That is not recommended at this time. It does not mean, and I'm glad you brought this up, it does not mean that not to use a double negative, we will still provide masks, we will still provide cleaning supplies. So if a student decides that they would like to clean their station, they will be allowed to do so. So we will still have masks available.
Back to the remote at BOCES, Do you know have they made a statement in terms of what their guidelines are? I mean, I can make an assumption on what I think they will be, but they will be requiring masking obviously as well, because of the population that we believe will be signing up for that program.
Again, but it's remote too. So
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But the people in BOCES, the staff members at BOCES, the students are remote, but is staff
yes,
in-house?
staff is,
So do you know if
but
they're
staff may
masking?
work from home as well. I don't know all the specific details
Just
on how they're working it out, but
curious.
BOCES has adopted the same indoor versus outdoor.
And I was
masking.
referring to staff that were in the building. So I didn't make that clear. I was referring to staff in the
Yes.
building, not students.
Understood. Yep.
And in terms of back to hygiene, we're cleaning protocols in terms of hand washing and all. So we're not even requiring the students to give a quick hand sanitizing before they walk in each class?
Hand sanitization is still part of it. So we will have the hand sanitizer available. So everything will stay
Okay.
going
I did miss that
forward.
'cause I
Yes,
couldn't-
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
We will, but as far as cleaning materials, which is what Ms. Lindar's asked about,
Mhm.
we will have that available for students as well. But yes, hand sanitizers, masks, all those will be provided.
And is there any information that you can provide to us with regard to where discussions have been on all extracurriculars? After-school clubs, athletics, music, theater,
Our
arts?
intent is to move forward. Mr. Sugar said he would possibly join us. No. I'm looking around the room, but he had the parent meeting tonight. We're moving forward with interscholastic athletics as well as extracurriculars.
So the full slate will be offered as pre-pandemic.
That is our intent. Yeah, I haven't heard of any concerns at this point, but our intent is to be up and running.
So in your written guidance, Dr. Tice, that'll include information for parents so that they understand how the quarantine might apply to students as they're engaged in these different activities, if they come into contact with other students who, other students who may test positive. And also, are we talking to other districts about their policies? And is there where last time schools were sort of working with each other so that they had the same requirements, so that when our athletes went to other buildings, everyone was following the same precautions.
Yes, Mr. Sugar indicated, just to use sports interscholastic athletics as an example, that the league had made the decision to be congruent with each other.
And one of the things if I recall correctly, that County Executive McMahon said was that the masking applies to third-party vendors as well. So for any of the folks who are working with any of our extracurricular activities or coming into our buildings for any programming, they will be required to also wear masks and have the testing.
That is my understanding at this
Have the
time.
testing or the vaccine, I'm sorry.
That is my understanding at this time. We will ask legal counsel in the next couple of days. I was the life of the party at the construction meeting today, so when I shared that with the contractors.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You were.
What are the thoughts on cohorting? So particularly in the elementary level, students stayed together in their cohorts. And then even when classes came back full-time, recess was separated by classroom. Students were not allowed to mix. In light of sort of the changes in outdoor guidance, will any of that change and resume to normal?
We'll still be able to have some cohorting at the elementary grades, possibly K through 5, 5th grade at the middle schools as well. But we lose the containment, obviously 6 through 12. And I think another thing for the board to realize, and it goes to Ms. Romano's point, there will be no hybrid option. So if for some reason we are not dividing students by alphabetical, our intent is full throttle for academics, the arts, and athletics. And to do that, we did not put any artificial alpha by oldest child in the household like we did last year to separate things into a hybrid. Now, that doesn't mean if push comes to shove that we cannot separate into a hybrid, but it's not going to be surgically equal to do so. So again, to your points, students are back in school. We're full throttle in terms of offering all the academics, and to make the master schedule work, there is no fallback in hybrid. We are not dividing students up alphabetical like we did last year.
So, sorry, just to clarify, what I'm asking about cohorting is, students lost the opportunity to see a lot of their classmates last year because they stayed in cohorts all year. They weren't able to play on recess together. They had to play in little squares. I mean, is any of that going to evolve in light of sort of different recommendations for outdoor, what we've seen in camps and other things that have evolved over the summer?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I suspect yes. I think, certainly some social distancing with the 3 feet will be in place, but I do think they will mix things up a little bit more outside to be consistent. Indoors, and again, my apologies for not replying appropriately, but indoors, again, we suspect we can keep the cohorts contained, but with the bell schedule, students switching 6 through 12 will be a little bit more difficult to do that inside.
And just as a corollary for extracurriculars, concerts, things that I think were obviously off the table, will any of those activities resume? Some of those really wonderful moments for especially the younger students outdoors, or just will there be other opportunities? And I know it depends on the safety, but I know that parents are asking those questions.
Yeah, we're hopeful, as you know, and the principals, believe it or not, in our scheduling meeting in June, have actually planned concerts going forward. Some are even ambitious as far as using the Wellwood Auditorium before things turn over at the holiday time. So I think they have their fingers crossed. So our intent is to return. As you know, we are not publishing a calendar this year. We put an article up on the website. I know that's caused some consternation in parts of the community. Ironically, tongue-in-cheek, as you know, last year's calendar with no dates was probably the most accurate that we've ever had, because the minute we publish the dates, things get changed for one reason or another. So I know some are hoping that they would have a calendar, but we are working with our communications department, with the building newsletters, to try to push that out and let people know so they can, is it 1 month at a time? Is it 3 months at a time? Can we send that out and then have it revised so people can put events such as concerts or parent information nights or open houses? Some have already announced, like the high school open house will be virtual. So there's some things that will continue virtually going forward, just again because of the sheer volume of people in the building. But we will try to get back to the concerts if at all possible.
Thanks. I'm just going to bundle my questions. My last question is around arrival and dismissal. So arrival and dismissal was staggered last year. It resulted in shorter school times. We definitely heard complaints about that. Kids were in school less instructional time. What can we do this year to change that and still dismiss and students safely?
It's going to be tightened up. That was one of our first debates, if you will, as the year ended and planning for next year. So it will not be stretched out as much as it was last year. There was a concern over lost instructional time, but at the same time, now that the social distancing has shortened between students, now that we can put 2 in a seat, and so all the different bus routes that we were creative about, trying to keep 1 student in a seat or siblings from the same household, that has been a game changer. So now the guidance is keep the routes as quick and short as possible, get the students in. So that has all been compressed, even to the point, as you know, we've stopped with the temperature checks. There really isn't a holding place, as the students get off the bus. So we're going to try to get them in and get them out as efficiently as we can.
So Craig, you mentioned that the lunches were going to go back to the cafeteria. And I know that obviously look different at the different levels, but what will that look like? Is it still the 3 feet with barriers, or is it barriers with further feet? Are there going to be kids who have to sit by themselves? I know there were a few instances of that last year. Or like, can they sit, or, with the round tables, are they able to sit there? I don't know, just what's the thinking so far?
Great question. The thinking so far is to try to use the tables where possible rather than the tablet armchairs, much like the high school did last year. Use the plastic barriers. Again, to Ms. Lindar's question, it's not so much we're worried, it's more of a sneeze guard, a salad bar, at the salad bar, so to speak, or so that Craig doesn't reach over to see what's in Kelly's lunchbox. And so to keep that vigilance there, that it's still a pandemic, but if we can return to the use of the tables, some principals are heading in that direction. Others are not worried about the 3-foot distancing. Others may use more the tablet armchairs to keep the students separate, but I think for the most part, we'll be able to get everybody in the cafeterias. And it'll be a lot easier than using the rooms for the lunches as we did at the elementary level. It was great to do that last year, but I think for the socialization, we need to get back to the cafeterias.
I imagine out of probably all of the activities at school, the cafeteria might be the most problematic when it comes to potential quarantine, like probably as it always has been.
If I could piggyback off of that, I know in the high school, crazy as it may seem, because when we moved here, we didn't realize kids could choose not to have a lunch, which to me just seems sheer nuttiness. But in any event, so those students are allowed to bring a snack into the classroom, eat their lunch in the classroom. How do we resolve that issue when they're pulling their face mask down to eat?
My understanding is we stopped that last year and provided the wellness breaks, I think, as Dr. Kilmer and his team referenced it. So there were times when students could find their way to an area to eat their lunch, but not directly in the classroom. So I suspect that will continue.
So I want to follow back to a little bit about what we talked about our last meeting about metrics and what we're following, because still to this point, County Health Department is recommendations, not requirements. CDC is recommendations. State Ed Department is recommendations. And I'm very happy to hear what you said about all sports and all extracurricular are a go. And that's really important before our September meeting, because the athletic programs all start well before our next meeting on September 2nd. But in the state guidance, it recommends that some of those things be canceled, which I'm certainly not in favor of and strongly opposed to. So it seems like some of the recommendations were, and I think Onondaga County, although the county executive came out and said, no, I support sports and they should continue. As I read the guidance, there's a footnote that says refer to state ed on this, which is cancel. So I don't really quite know where county health stands on that. I'm fully supportive of us as a district moving forward with that full slate, as you've said we will. But it again raises my concern where you recommend that we're going to revisit monthly the guidance to ensure we're congruent with local regs or mandates. Well, there are not mandates, there are not requirements. So let's just fast forward. If we were to October 1, we're doing our monthly review. I don't know what we would be reviewing. And again, I know you may not have that answer tonight, but I think in whatever it is that we do produce for September 2nd, and hopefully in advance of that by at least a few days so people can digest it before that meeting, do you expect that we will have within that some level of metrics that we will be following so that our families and community know where the goalpost is and what they have to do to get to the goalpost, and we don't face this situation again. We were at state's mercy last year, whether people want to believe that or not, but we were accused many times of moving the goalposts. This year, it's up to us at this point because everything's just recommendations. So do you expect in what you will have for September 2nd that we will have metrics so our community knows where those goalposts specifically are and what it is we'll be reviewing on a monthly basis?
I am hopeful that probably shortly after August 24th, that metrics will be forthcoming and possibly some mandates. So I will be happy to pass that along and communicate not only to the board, but to our community at large.
That assumes that mandates are coming from the state. If they do not, which is where we sit today,
Correct.
less than a month before school starts. If they do not, will we be putting out metrics and standards so the community knows what we will be reviewing on a month-to-month basis?
Yes, I think we will. Will it be, and again, there's always an art and a science to this. I know people want hard metrics to take moving the goalposts, or they're looking to split hairs, but it also depends what we're seeing in terms of the transmission rate. I mean, as we've seen with the Delta variant in the UK and in India, that it's peaked and then dropped off. Does that take place here? So I think I would look to the health professionals to provide those metrics, whether it's the state. Will we have it? I mean, I can throw a dart against a dartboard, but I would like to have the feedback from the health professionals. Do we have to convene the medical advisory committee? They all offered to return. Some were unable to be there last night and communicated with the district clerk and would love to attend in the future. I would prefer to defer to the experts rather than just me randomly. I can gauge it, I can eyeball it in terms of the different color schemes that are outlined in the CDC guidance. And I know people want hard and fast rules because they want to argue one side or the other. But I would like to see what the trends are. I would like to see, I mean, people want to control a virus and control the pandemic, and people have had enough of it. You can't outthink the virus. You can't, I think we have to pay attention to our surroundings and make an informed decision. So would I love to have the science, the actual metrics? Absolutely. Is there going to be an art to it? Are things increasing? Are things decreasing? I don't want to say, oh, look, we're just under the threshold, so we get to do whatever. Never mind that overnight that number spiked and is probably increasing exponentially. So I don't want to get to the point where we're handcuffed to a numeric when you've got to look at the trends and extrapolate and interpolate in terms of the trend data. Does that make sense?
It does. And so I'm sorry to bundle also. So my last question is, as we move into these plans and whatever those metrics or plans may be, has there been talk, will there be talk about potentially doing different rules in the high school than perhaps elementary and middle? So elementary, none of the students are vaccinated. Middle school, half have had the opportunity. But would there be consideration at the high school level where every student has been eligible and every faculty member has been eligible to have differing rules in the high school building than the other two buildings?
Would the metrics change? Is that what you're saying between buildings? I think, yeah, we can customize it. I think the vaccine is a game changer that we didn't have a year ago today. And certainly as that has been on the landscape, you're right, that for those that have availed themselves of it, not everybody has, as we know, but for those that have availed themselves of it, yeah, I think it affords a certain level in allowing us to customize between the different buildings. I don't think it has to be an all or none, but I do think it has to be student focused on what the needs are. And you're right. So, the younger children right now may be involved in trial studies. And hopefully that information will be forthcoming and open opportunities up that some have only been able to dream about right now. But I think as the landscape changes, it doesn't have to be symmetrical for me in terms of the same cookie cutter.
Okay.
I think that's how we're going to get out of it. I think people are underestimating the pandemic, thinking it's a toggle switch. I think it's going to be with us for a while, and I think 1 year from the next is going to change, and it's going to open new possibilities. So just like this year brings consternation because there's changes right now that's different than the good old days of the hybrid model that we may want to wax nostalgic about. I think year 3, year 4 will be different. I mean, I hope we get to a point where, you know, we return to what we thought was pre-pandemic. Who knows if that will ever be possible? It may be with us just like rhinoviruses are now with the common cold. We don't know what we don't know. But I suspect each year will be different. And as those variables change, yes, I think it allows us to customize, to your point.
So I think where that's coming from is all the guidance that we've seen, recommendations, is coming out as K-12 guidance. And every school district is different as to how they split up their grades. But I think that there's a reasonable argument for many to be made where that the students have chosen to get vaccinated so that they can return their lives to as normal as possible, as soon as possible. And many of the K-12 recommendations are premised on the theory, well, many of the students haven't had the opportunity to be vaccinated. So I think there is a difference in many circumstances between our elementary students and our high school students. And I would hope as we progress through this year that we give consideration to maybe moving the high school to looser protocols sooner if the numbers and the metrics warrant such a decision.
Or as we've seen in the guidance for interscholastic sports, as you read, you know, only the participants who have been vaccinated can play the high-risk, close-contact sport. So it may be looser, it may be stricter, depending on what lens you look at it. But you're right, it's going to be different than the younger children who don't play interscholastic athletics or who don't have the availability of the vaccine.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to circle back to the medical advisory committee. So I just want to say that I'm really grateful to the committee members who are giving their time to this committee and offering to provide more time. And it seems like there was a strong push towards testing and making sure that we could keep up with surveillance testing. And I'm just wondering if we can lean on that committee to provide more guidance, resources, connections as to how testing is going to be pretty critical this year. And can we do more than we did last year? Partnering with the county, but also there's other resources, private as well. So I guess I just want to ask that question. Also, I would be in favor of the committee weighing in on some of the metrics that you and Dan just discussed, providing some framework of how we make these decisions. And we are not the experts, but they can help us into how we might do that, as well as bouncing off the plan that we put together for the safety protocols, the reopening, so that they could provide some specific feedback on the policies we're setting. I think that would be a great use of their resources on those 3 things. So that would be my recommendation. And we do have time to reconvene or provide them with those documents, that document.
And like I said earlier, some were on vacation, offered to help us as we go forward. I think that is a great opportunity for us to connect with not only medical professionals, but parents within our community who are medical professionals. So I totally agree. As far as the testing, the county is willing to partner. As you've heard me say before, it's pool testing, which has advantages and limitations. There is federal money for that. We were told in today's meeting that it can be surveillance testing, but it can be symptomatic, asymptomatic. They're willing to do it, but you just can't pick one or another. There is a short supply of the rapid tests that were used last year. So right now, there is not a stockpile. So the pool testing is the default at this point, that the rapid tests are not available. And as you saw with the executive order today, it has to be through a medical professional or a pharmacy. So it's my understanding that even emergency medical technicians or trainers who helped us last year, how we ran the testing even for our athletics on Saturdays. The good news is now they're back, the children are back Monday through Friday, but now it has to be done by a nurse, another licensed healthcare professional. Now that the governor's emergency orders have expired, it takes it back to the old level on who can administer the test. So that's why, thanks to Mr. Gordon, he's looking into what pharmacies would be interested in having our business. Do they set up a testing clinic here? Do we send them to one of the brand name pharmacies in town? How can we cultivate that partnership to have that testing available? I spoke to Mr. Sugar today for athletics. So instead of testing all on a Saturday, can we break the testing down? Does this team come in on Monday? Does this team come in on Tuesday after school? Especially if the nurse has to administer all the testing, that it cannot be subcontracted out. So these are all the things, I mean, like you, I want this done yesterday. My worst nightmare last year was having guidance July 15th, having it due July 30th, and still feeling that we weren't prepared. Here we are in the 11th hour, if you'll forgive the mixed metaphor of the summer, as we approach Labor Day, and things still are not settled and, being rolled out. So I would love to have had this all done yesterday, but some of this is hot off the press, as they say. And certainly we want to partner with the county. They were great in terms of the partnerships last year. And the things that they provided, but I also understand supply chain issues as you have all dealt with in your own lives and businesses. And so it doesn't surprise me that the rapid tests are in short supply, that it's going to be more the molecular PCR type tests, the pool testing. We just are going to have to flex with that going forward.
Yeah, I think that the more partnerships we can have with the community beyond the county health department's resources to provide testing to our students that get in a position where they have to get a test because they've been exposed. So it may be telling them where to go. Certainly the nurses already do that, but just seeing what kind of partnerships we can cultivate so that we're doing our very best to get that testing done as quickly as possible and it be accessible for all.
Agreed. And if this executive order holds, which I imagine it will, what do we do for our employees? When does that testing occur? I know what Syracuse City Schools are doing. For example, they're having their nurse stay after at the end of the day, paying them, compensating the nurse to provide the testing. But do we have an on-site clinic, so to speak, testing clinic for those adults who have not had their vaccine yet? So it's going to be interesting to see how that all unfolds.
Craig, so I have a question piggybacking off of that. If we're talking about pool testing, I mean, that's potentially putting kids in quarantine risk? There's no waiver for being tested at a school that you don't have to follow the county quarantine rules, or we're looking at maybe 1 to 2 days of kids who might have to be out just because of the pool testing?
And that's the head scratcher. You take the good with the bad. That's what has everybody worried. There's been quick turnarounds. We talked a little about that yesterday with the medical advisory committee. Sometimes it's 12 hours, sometimes it's 24. It's been as much as 48 sandwiched around a weekend. That's just concerning that because if the pool is positive, then the reflex testing still has to occur where each one of us get our own test to figure out who is the one that has the virus. So that's, it may not be a 10-day quarantine, but it's going to be upwards to 1 to 2 days of not knowing, uncertainty until that reflex testing comes back. That's a great point.
So Craig, just to piggyback on what Rebecca was talking about on testing, because of the shortages and the new requirements. Again, I think this is one of these opportunities, as Rebecca spoke about, building these partnerships. We have a lot of medical providers in this community who volunteered regularly at the county and state testing sites. And I would suspect that they would be equally as willing to volunteer to do that testing administration here for their own district. So as this is put together, I think it would behoove us to do some wide outreach into our community to build that list of, if we're able to use you, who would be willing to volunteer to do this? Because we have many, many of them that have done it for more than the last year already elsewhere. So if we could do that outreach, that would be great.
Additional questions, comments from the board? Okay. We're going to go to 2.02, the public comment session that we did add. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? Did they leave? Okay. All right. So we will then go on to, well, we removed the general approval of reopening protocols, but we did leave it open to there may be some individual items that we wanted to approve tonight. So we have that discussion now. Dr. Tice, are there specific recommendations that you would like us to approve tonight? Or a specific recommendation that you'd like us to approve tonight?
At this point, I think right now, we're trying to get as much information out, talking it through again, as we have over the last few meetings, the articles that our communications department has put out. I would wait until you have the plan in front of you. We are going through the old plan. The new plan is going to look thinner. It's not going to have as many different sections to it. Less is more. But I would wait till you have the whole plan, just like you said earlier, not just so there's no confusion about it.
Well, I think the biggest piece of the plan is going to be the mask requirement, but that's no longer something that we have to even vote on because that is a mandate from the county. I'm sorry.
They're
the
all recommendations at this point. Their mandate may be forthcoming from New York State Department of Health.
Right. I'm sorry.
So just on that, my only wonder is the only thing we actually had to approve last year and did approve was on a sport by sport basis for those to proceed. Those sports, again, that they're starting before we can reconvene on September 2nd. Is that something that you need our approval from, or is that just proceeding as the district recommendation and plan?
Again, because we're A, behind schedule, and B, at this point, operating with recommendations and not mandates from emergency powers, there's nothing to approve at this point. Ironically, the only approval I need on the new plan is for spending the federal stimulus money on the different things that will be part of the plan in terms of COVID. They just want to make sure it has your good housekeeping seal of approval on it. So I am not worried in terms of the sports, in terms of getting out in front, as I was last year.
So my hesitation with waiting for the whole piece, at least to not have a conversation among board members as to where they're leaning, is there's a lot of families are waiting with bated breath on our decision around universal masking. And so whether we decide tonight or at least tip our hand of where we're headed, I think it's a long wait until September 2nd for families to hear what we're thinking. So I would strongly be in favor of at least a conversation along those lines. If not a consensus around the policy, perhaps it'll change. I don't see it changing in a couple of weeks. That's my own opinion, but I guess I just want to be really transparent with the community because we have received a lot of correspondence on this issue, and waiting till September 2nd is days away from the date of school, and it may impact some families' decisions. So what do other people think about that?
Well, I have, as you know, recommended indoor universal masking.
I would be fine voting on that and supporting that this evening. Thoughts from the rest of the board?
I don't even think we need to vote on it. I think that we can just see by consensus whether or not, we're leaning in favor of the administrative recommendation on universal masking indoors and optional outdoors.
Okay, so we don't have to vote, but we can, by a show of hands, see if the board is in favor or in support, has consensus in favor of the superintendent's recommendation that we have universal masking in our schools for staff and staff and students,
Regardless of vaccination.
regardless of vaccination. We can raise our hands.
I think we should just maybe just discuss.
Discuss it. I think, well, if we want to have consensus, at some point you do have to say, yes, I agree. And whether or not you raise your hand or just say, yes, I agree, I'm fine either way, but you can't have consensus if you don't hear people actually say they agree to it. So we can go around. Why don't we just go around? Mark, there you go. Let's start with you.
I'm happy to go first.
Thank you.
So based on what we know today and everything that I've been able to read up on and all the health professionals I've been able to talk to, it seems to make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And I think is the unselfish thing to do is to have mandate masks in class and optional outdoors.
Thank you. Rebecca?
I fully support the administrative recommendation based on the CDC guidance, the NICEAD guidance, the county health guidance, and now our medical advisory committee and everything else I've read about the current state of events. So I support that and look forward to really putting the fine points on the actual reopening plan.
Thank you. Daryl?
As I said at our last meeting, I'm fully in support of the recommendation of the superintendent. I think it's important, and we've seen CDC and pediatricians and all, so I'm in full agreement.
Thank you, Daryl. Sherry?
Based on all of what we've seen and the work and communications that our district has had and our administration has had, I am in support of the recommendation of masking indoors and optional outdoors.
Thank you. I concur. I am fully in support of the recommendation for masking indoors, optional outdoors. I think our goal this year, what we want is to have our kids in school as much as possible. And I think this is it's a huge part of being able to keep our kids in school and doing the activities that they enjoy. Elena?
I also support the universal masking K-12, with the information that we have at hand today, knowing that those recommendations may change. And I do also agree with what Dan had said with regard to high school guidelines versus middle school, elementary school, because of the availability of vaccine to that building's population. But I would also hope that we will continue to be vigilant for those students that are having a difficult time with the masking, that we offer whatever assistance we can to help those students through this entire return to school full time.
Thank you. Dan?
So I would echo what Elena just said, and I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a public health specialist, so I will defer to the recommendations of the Medical Advisory Task Force that was convened specifically for this purpose. So long as the masking requirement comes along with the concrete guidance that I've talked about the last two meetings, so that our community knows what that actually means and where we're going with it.
Thank you. Kelly?
I am in full support of the administrative recommendation on masking, universal masking.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, we have consensus, Dr. Tice, on that issue. Were there any other items that the board wanted to discuss at this point? All right, so we have a lot to get out to the community and to the staff in regards to this upcoming year, and every confidence in Dr. Tyson and his team to do so. So next item on the agenda is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Rebecca. Second from Daryl. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? All right, we'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.